All right, so we're on the second heading of the formation of a bipolar world. We are going to talk about the confrontations in Korea and Cuba. So there are two times that the Cold War almost becomes hot, which could have been disastrous for everyone. One of those times is going to be with Korea. So what will happen is that North and South Korea will be divided at the 30th parallel, and with the with the understanding that the North Korea would be communist and that South Korea would be democratic capitalist, and that they would soon have an election which would keep the peninsula united, and that doesn't happen. So what happens is that in June 25th, 1950, what happens is North Korea attacks South Korea and has an incredibly effective surprise attack. They took Seoul, they almost took the entire peninsula. The United States immediately went to the United Nations to create a resolution so that South Korea could beat back this attack. So what ended up happening is the United States led a group, and what ended up happening is that they actually attacked in Incheon, which we don't have a map here to show you, but it's kind of in the halfway point of South Korea. So by that, they surprised them, and then they were able to split the army, and they were able to take out the South, and they were able to move up to the North. Now, what happened was so that's what happened here in Incheon. Then what's going to end up happening is the question was, well, where do you stop? And so MacArthur wants to continue to go up and basically liberate all of Korea for democratic capitalism, which caused China to get really nervous. And so they insisted that if they went past the if if the forces went past that 38th parallel, then that attacks their interest, and they would get involved in the war. And so what happened is sure enough, when the U.S. kept marching north, um, China's going to send 300,000 troops down to protect North Korea. And what they're going to do is they're going to push back the Allies back to essentially the original border of the 30th parallel. This is one of the this makes it one of the most tragic wars that the world has ever seen. Similar to World War One, millions of people are going to die essentially for nothing. And so what will happen is there will be a ceasefire that in July of '53, but there has never been an official peace treaty. We'll have to see in the coming years if we will continue to have this split or whether Korea will be united once again. This led us to the idea of the concept of the globalization of containment. The idea that, hey, the United States is going to have to be active to make sure that communist forces can't inspire people, other countries to turn communist. This is called the domino theory. The idea that is that, hey, once one country becomes communist, they're going to put pressure on other countries to be communist, and this dominoes will keep falling. So, um, so that's going to be an important part of U.S. policy going forward, just to promote those dominoes. Speaking of dominoes, we have Cuba, the second place, where we almost had a hot war with the Soviet Union. So the United States had initially really made sure that there was no Soviet influence in the Western Hemisphere, which provided us a lot of safety. That's going to change with this guy, Fidel Castro, who's going to lead a revolution in who's going to lead a revolution in Cuba. He's going to overthrow the autocratic Batista, and what's going to happen is that's going to really scare the United States because Cuba definitely wants to have a communist government. He says he's going to have elections, and he doesn't. And so the Soviet Union is ecstatic because here they go. They have a chance to have a country right at the doorstep of the United States. The Cuba, in many ways, was kind of functioning as like the Las Vegas for the East Coast of the United States. So even though it was autocratic, they were very friendly with U.S. tourists and rich people and so on and so forth. So what ends up happening is the U.S. cuts trade relations with Cuba, and the Soviet Union just continues to support them and prop them up. This leads to the U.S. to take action in the Bay of Pigs. So again, what happened was is that you couldn't attack directly with U.S. troops because then the Soviets would fight directly, and then we eventually might get into nuclear warfare. And so instead, we have a proxy war where essentially we will train 1,500 Cubans to help lead a revolution to overthrow Castro. Now the issue is that this made sense to the United States because from the United States perspective, they thought there is no way that people would want to have a communist government, that they only needed to help a little bit, and the people would rise up, of course, and get rid of any sort of communism. And that's not what ended up happening. So these 1,500 people are basically routed. And what ends up happening is the U.S. gets more and more desperate on how to kind of destabilize Castro in Cuba. What will happen is that this leads to the Cuban Missile Crisis, which, and an interesting point in world history, is probably the time there should have been a nuclear war. And thank goodness it didn't. So what's going to happen is that the Soviet Union is going to start to bring in missiles into Cuba to so that they have this ability to directly attack the United States. The U.S. obviously does not want that there, does not want to live in that type of fear, where just a missile could be fired and within minutes, parts of the country would be destroyed. And so we have this confrontation. There's a blockade. There's a quarantine, not a blockade, because a blockade is a active war. And eventually, what's going to happen is that the United States and the Soviet Union are going to come to an agreement, where essentially the Soviet Union will take out the missiles from Cuba, and the United States promises to not destabilize Castro anymore. And also under the table, they say, hey, we actually have some weapons in Turkey, which we may not. If those missiles are gone from Cuba, we may just let those decommission in a while. They don't say that part out loud, but that's the understanding. It's a very tense 13 days. There's a great movie which kind of goes through it, which is a great movie. But the best part of it is that there was no nuclear weapons used, which would have caused the destruction of both the United States, Soviet Union, and any sort of life as we know it. See you in the next video.